Well, we definitely got a lot of response from that story, including this report from students at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. This is interesting, Tuscaloosa, excuse me. It's from Professor George Daniels, who also joined us to talk about the Black in America series. Here he is on this one.
One of the biggest findings from our discussion tonight, CNN spotlighted the biggest issue facing Latinos in America today, the one of identity. The story from Charlotte, North Carolina, of Bill and Betty Garcia resonated with these students because it reflected one that many Latinos in America are trying to grapple with. Do they identify more with their Latino heritage or more as Americans?
Professor Daniels, nice enough to join us this afternoon to talk about his impressions and his students' impressions of the show. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
That was a story that also spoke to me. I grew up in an environment that was very multicultural in Hawaii, where people looked a lot like me. Ended up moving to Maryland and spent the rest of my time there in high school with a bunch of people who didn't look like me. So I can kind of understand what those kids are going through. I'm wondering if your students, if any of them felt the same way.
Definitely. We had a range of students, some who came from, their parents came from Mexico, some whose parents came from Guatemala, but we found that even among the students that we invited to come, there were different reactions to how much they identify with their Hispanic heritage versus their being an American. And that was something that was rare in the special because there weren't a lot of young people profiled in all of the stories that we saw in this first night. So I think that's why when we polled the students about which story resonated with them the most, that one was the highest.
Were any of them disappointed with the way in which, going from parent to child, there was just something lost in translation in regards to culture?
I think that was the case in some cases, only because the experiences of the parents are not necessarily the experiences that students are having today. And that can depend on where you went to high school, that can depend on the communities in which you're operating. When you come to the university, the experience can be very different.
Dr. Daniels, I'm going to bring Soledad back into this conversation. Soledad, I know that the parents of those kids, Betty and Bill, they seem to, after you question them, admit that they wish things would have been done differently as they were raising their boys.
Oh, and my mother does the same thing. She says, oh, I wish I had taught you Spanish. And my mother aggressively did not teach us Spanish because she felt like, you know, we needed to blend in and fit in, and we were American. I mean, I don't know that there are any parents who don't have some kind of woulda, coulda, shoulda, you know, at the end when their kids are a little bit grown up. It's interesting, though, and listening to Professor Daniels, another story that is really about a pull of cultures is the story of Francisca, a young girl, 13 years old, who is part of a terrible and pretty shocking statistic about Latinas who attempt suicide. That's the highest rate is among Latinas, these young girls. But a lot of her issues are this culture clash. You know, her mom's from the Dominican Republic. She wants to be an American teen. And that means the two of them clash, and she can't quite navigate that particularly well. And I think that those stories resonate with a lot of people for the exact reason you say, which is we're all trying to figure out sort of where you fit. What's interesting, I think, in addition, in the Bill and Betty Garcia story, which we really just scraped the surface on, I think, is they're in Charlotte, North Carolina, a city, as they told me, where people are really divided into white and black. And you have dark-skinned brown boys who, you know, are being identified by others as African American, who feel like they don't speak a language. Their parents tell them they're Latino, and they don't really know kind of where they fit. When I asked Brian, I said, you know, your mom feels like maybe you're embarrassed by the culture. He said to me, no, she shouldn't feel that way at all. You know, I'm embarrassed that I don't speak the language. I'm embarrassed that I don't know how to dance well. I'm embarrassed that I don't know how to do this. And I thought that was a really revealing answer, that it wasn't as his mom thought, he's ashamed, or even as the emailer said, you know, these boys are ashamed of being Latino. Not at all. They're more trying to figure out how to be what they think is the definition of Latino.
Dr. Daniels, I'm wondering if over the years you've seen a shift. Have you been seeing more students who are Latino coming into the classroom who are prouder of their heritage, who are more vocal about where they come from and where their family comes from?
Well, quite frankly, Reggie, we have to be careful when we talk about what racial background our students are coming from, because often we really don't know. Even in our crowd last night, some students who self-identified as Latino, I wouldn't have been able to say that just by looking at them. But I will say that the experiences of Hispanic students, those experiences are coming into our class discussions a lot more now than when I started here 7 years ago.
I suppose specials like these, and the more that we talk about these issues, the better. At least it's getting out there on the table and people can debate it.
Absolutely. The key is to understand that Latino in America is a teaching tool on so many different levels, from a journalism class to a course about racial identity to how do media address the issues of underrepresentation of racial minorities. There's so many ways you can teach with this, as well as the Latino in America book, which we've already started teaching from here at University of Alabama.
Ah, I bet Soledad is happy to hear that.
Does that mean I get to be a visiting professor to your class, Dr. Daniels?
Absolutely.
Excellent. We'll talk. We'll talk later. Call me.
Ah, see, you're making a great connection there. Dr. Daniels, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for doing this with your students.
Thanks for having me.